Everyone knows the dirtiest rumor about Catherine the Great. Fewer know why it spread. The truth isn't a wati about a woman's appetite. It's about men terrified of a ruler they couldn't or control. Catherine rose from a minor German princess to master an empire, and her enemies, unable to beat her in law or war, tried to beat her in the bedroom. This is how a lie was forged, and how she used it anyway. If you enjoy this kind of dark, fact-driven history, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? It helps the channel reach more curious minds. Now step into Imperial Russia, where power and pleasure blurred, and a rumor became the deadliest weapon in the room. She arrived as Sophie, a minor German princess with cold hands and open eyes. St. Petersburg tested both. The court did not shout, it watched. Smiles were puzzles, silences traps. She learned quickly that in Russia, being harmless was dangerous, and being useful was safe. So she built a mask that reflected what others needed. Before the empress, she was dutiful grace. Before priests, pure devotion. Oil on her brow, a new name on her tongue, Catherine Alexeyevna. The conversion cost her nothing and bought her everything. Time, proximity, information. She hunted fluency like survival, drilling Russian until her accent dissolved. She mapped corridors of power not with titles, but with tendencies. Who flattered, who hesitated, who lied. At night she made a ledger no treasurer would see, quiet notes on appetites and fears written in a careful hand. Friends were liabilities, patterns were assets. Punishments in that palace were swift and theatrical. She studied each one like a theorem. What was said, what was meant, what was learned. Every cruelty became data. Every slight, a reason to improve the disguise. By the end of winter, the courtiers stopped calling her the Little German. They called her something more dangerous, reliable. Reliability was her camouflage. It made people speak freely in her presence, mistaking stillness for obedience. Catherine listened, collected, and calculated. Her husband, Peter, laughed too loudly, spent too freely, and trusted too easily. She did none of these things. While he played soldier with his toy regiments, she played stateswoman with his generals. At night, she wrote in a cipher of habit, names, gestures, rumors. Her notebooks were maps of survival. She learned who hated whom, who owed whom, and who dreamed too loudly of favor. Knowledge was not a luxury, it was self-defense. Fear had refined her. The girl who once trembled in a carriage now studied human weakness the way alchemists studied metals. Every insult hardened her will, every betrayal sharpened her patience. When courtiers laughed at her foreignness, she smiled and thanked them. When they plotted, she listened longer. Their scorn became the rhythm of her ascent. By the time spring thawed the Neva, Catherine no longer reacted to cruelty. She recorded it, categorized it, and stored it like a weapon for later. The empire had not noticed yet, but history had just found its apprentice. Power in Russia didn't change hands through law. It shifted through courage and timing. Catherine understood both. By 1762, her husband Peter had inherited the throne and immediately began breaking it. He mocked the church, alienated nobles, and humiliated the army that had once adored him. Where he created chaos, Catherine quietly assembled order. She found her instruments in the Orlov brothers, young officers with ambition sharper than their swords. Grigory, the most daring of them, admired her calm intelligence. In whispered meetings behind locked doors, they spoke not of romance, but of arithmetic. How many troops would stand with her? How many would stay neutral? How many might hesitate long enough to lose? When the day came, it moved like a storm. Peter rode out for his military games. Catherine rode toward destiny. The guards swore allegiance to her before noon. By evening, her husband was arrested. No battle, no speeches, just precision. Witnesses said she appeared in uniform, the imperial banner in her hand, voice steady as command itself. Russia has no emperor, she told the soldiers. Follow me, and she will have a mother. The men knelt. The empire obeyed. A coup had become a coronation. After the coup, Catherine understood that ruling was not about issuing decrees. It was about shaping belief. Russia needed to see her not as a usurper, but as destiny fulfilled. So she rewrote reality through ritual. Her coronation shimmered with calculated grandeur, candles, velvet, and 1,000 kneeling courtiers rehearsing loyalty until it felt natural. She built her power the way artists build light, by controlling contrast. Where Peter had ridiculed religion, she displayed piety. Where nobles feared instability, she offered spectacle. Appearances became administration. Catherine learned that affection was cheaper than fear, but more reliable than gold. She gave audiences, remembered names, wrote notes in her own hand, small mercies that made men forget they were being managed. Her salons became political weather stations. Every compliment, every glance was a forecast of favor or danger. Rumor, once her enemy, became her instrument. When pamphleteers whispered about her lovers, she let them. A lie repeated loudly enough could smother a truth that mattered more. While courtiers speculated about her heart, she redrew Russia's hierarchy. Charm bought time, scandal bought distraction, and in that silence between gossip and governance, Catherine built her reign. The palace never stopped whispering. It wasn't enough to rule. She had to remain interesting. And so, Catherine turned interest itself into a political system. Her favorites, the men the court called lovers, were chosen like ministers. Beauty mattered, yes, but loyalty mattered more. Each was an investment in stability, not sentiment. A new favorite meant a new faction contained. Soldiers gained discipline, nobles gained reassurance, and envy found a safe distraction. When one man's usefulness waned, she dismissed him with estates, pensions, and a gracious note. It wasn't cruelty. It was policy. Behind the rumors of indulgence, there was choreography. Catherine understood that intimacy, when controlled, disarmed threats. A man flattered by proximity rarely plots rebellion. She allowed gossip to circulate because it kept the dangerous busy. The courtiers believed they were watching a romance. They were watching risk management. While they catalogued her supposed passions, she catalogued their debts and betrayals. To her, affection was a transaction measured not in kisses, but in obedience. By the time her critics finished writing satires about her bed, Catherine had already replaced half the ministers who financed them. Pleasure in her empire was just another form of discipline. Rumors thrive on idleness, and Catherine left no room for it. She worked 16 hours a day, her desk a fortress of ink and parchment. While Europe gossiped about her lovers, she was drafting the Nakas, a reform manifesto that blended Enlightenment ideals with imperial pragmatism. She rewrote laws, reorganized courts, and expanded education not as charity, but as architecture. Order was her true pleasure. Each decree was both reform and reminder. Power, properly used, could outshine scandal. She invited foreign philosophers to her court, debated them in their own languages, and quoted their ideas better than they could. When Voltaire called her the Star of the North, she smiled, knowing stars only shine because darkness stares at them. Her ministers learned that diligence was her intimacy. She read every report, corrected every line, and even noted grammatical errors in the margins. To serve her was to be measured constantly. And while the pamphleteers abroad painted her as decadent, the empire beneath her hand expanded, its borders, its roads, its mind. The louder the world mocked her, the harder she worked, until one day even her enemies had to admit, rumor can amuse, but reform endures. He entered not as a courtier, but as a force. Grigory Potemkin, brilliant, audacious, untamed, did not bow deeply or flatter softly. He spoke to Catherine as an equal, a rarity in a palace addicted to submission. Their first arguments were sparks that refused to fade. Their alliance, a combustion of intellect and ambition. Potemkin saw empire the way she did, not as land, but as a living machine. Together they planned cities, ports, and armies as if composing music, logic, rhythm, escalation. When Catherine dreamed of the Black Sea, Potemkin built ships to meet it. When she spoke of civilization, he raised it from dirt. Their letters mixed statecraft and affection, part orders, part poetry. "For the only hand I trust," he once wrote, sending a jeweled snuff box. She kept it near her desk for decades. Their love was not gentle, but it was productive. While courtiers traded gossip about their quarrels, Russia gained fleets, roads, and towns. The pair ruled like twin architects, one from the capital, one from the frontier, constructing a vision of empire that no single ruler could sustain alone. In a world that mistook passion for weakness, they proved it could also be design. Great fires cannot burn forever. They must either destroy or transform. Catherine and Potemkin chose transformation. When their passion grew too vast for one palace, they turned it into partnership. He took command of the southern territories. She remained in St. Petersburg. Between them flowed hundreds of letters, half strategy, half longing, written in code, wit, and shared ambition. They were not separated. They were orbiting. He governed the frontier with her authority. She ruled the capital with his insight. Some said they married in secret. Perhaps they did. It didn't matter. Their true bond was comprehension, a mutual recognition that neither flattery nor ceremony could equal. When he returned from campaign, sick and worn, she welcomed him in private. No diplomats, no courtiers, just two rulers who had built a world together. He called her my Catherine of the North. She called him my conqueror. When he died on the road years later, she locked herself in her chambers and wept unseen. Then she rose, read his final dispatch, and continued working. Grief was not an interruption. It was a cost. Potemkin had given her everything except permanence. That she would forge alone. By the late 1780s, Catherine's power seemed untouchable. That made her dangerous and irresistible prey. Her enemies no longer fought with armies. They fought with ink. From Paris came satire disguised as revolution. From London, caricatures dripping with filth. They called her greedy, vain, insatiable. They mocked her age, her lovers, her appetite for power. The more enlightened the men claimed to be, the dirtier their jokes became. The ugliest of these rumors, the one that would outlive them all, was born in a Paris café, somewhere between wine and envy. They whispered that the Empress of Russia had died in unspeakable humiliation, crushed beneath a horse, a lie so absurd it was impossible to ignore. It spread faster than truth could follow. Pamphlets crossed borders, sailors sang it in taverns, nobles repeated it behind fans. It was not meant to be believed. It was meant to diminish, to turn intellect into obscenity, command into ridicule. Catherine heard of it. She laughed once, sharply, then ordered another portrait painted, serene, untouchable, imperial. To deny the story would feed it, to ignore it would erase it. She chose the latter, but lies, once born, travel farther than armies. The rumor outlived her reign. Even after Catherine died peacefully at her desk in 1796, the lie rode on, faster than her couriers ever had. It became folklore, mutating from joke to legend, from insult to shorthand. For men who feared women in power, it was a story too satisfying to let die. It reduced a mind that had reformed laws, built cities, and ruled half a continent to a body destroyed by desire. Historians protested, printing evidence, letters, reforms, but facts are fragile when prejudice finds a punchline. Each correction sounded defensive. Each defense made the myth stronger. Europe, proud of its progress, clung to the tale. It was easier to laugh at Catherine than to learn from her. Easier to imagine female ambition punished than fulfilled. Even in Russia, she divided opinion, saint to some, seductress to others. The contradiction became her immortality, yet the same lie that tried to erase her also preserved her. Every repetition, every snide remark kept her name alive. Long after the kings who mocked her were forgotten, people still whispered about Catherine the Great. The scandal had triumphed, until history looked closer and realized the real scandal was brilliance itself. Centuries later, the rumor still clings to her name like dust to marble, but the marble endures. Catherine the Great remains one of the few rulers whose legend was built from both admiration and malice, and yet she survived them both. Her enemies crafted a myth to humiliate her, but it became the monument that kept her unforgettable. They wanted her to be remembered for sin. Instead, she is remembered for scale, for the cities, the reforms, the empire that still bears her shape. The story meant to shame her became proof of how deeply she had unsettled the world. Because the truth is simple. They didn't hate Catherine because she ruled with desire. They hated her because she ruled. And in trying to bury her beneath a lie, they ensured she would never be forgotten. Power fades. Scandal fades. But endurance writes history. And Catherine, in the end, wrote it herself.